Right, so since the failure of yet another set of ceasefire talks, Hamas have resumed rocket fire into Israel from pretty much right under the IDF's noses, returned to fighting the IDF on the ground in Gaza, and they've done so to devastating effect, able to rebuild their numbers quickly from amongst the civilian populace whom Israel have given nothing left to live for. A catastrophic mistake on their part, because where they thought Hamas was a spent and beaten force, they are now demonstrating that not only have they still got the numbers and the arms to fight Israel's soldiers and beat them, but humiliating them at the same time when taking out Hamas in response to the events of October 7th was supposedly Israel's primary goal, along with rescuing those hostages. In that, Israel have failed most of all, though I don't expect many people believe that hostage rescue was the main aim anymore. Israel have razed Gaza to the ground from north to south. It looks like a scene of desolation straight out of a post-apocalyptic work of fiction, but it's very much real, and Hamas have continued to underline just how badly Israel have failed despite that, to the point new ceasefire talks are garnering a very different response now. Right, so the biggest story coming out of the Middle East as we came into the new year was the news that Hamas had resumed rocket strikes on Israel, from northern Gaza at that, the latest round of ceasefire talks going the way of the dodo, as they always do when Benjamin Netanyahu is involved. The need to keep this war going, to keep him in post as Prime Minister, and not have the hard-right thugs he's in coalition with pull the plug on his government. We've seen this happen so many times over these last 16 months since the events of October 7th, and it's become news even in Israel itself that Netanyahu is to blame each and every time this happens, that the ceasefires fail. That perhaps a shift in that stance has now occurred, and I'll come on to that presently. Where Hamas had made huge concessions in that latest round of ceasefire talks, agreeing to an ongoing Israeli presence, it still wasn't good enough for Israel, good enough for Netanyahu. Their desire to maintain control of the Egyptian-Gaza border, for example, in violation of peace accords between Egypt and Israel, a known tactic for a cynic like me, and I'm sure many of you, that this was a great excuse to bring about the collapse of talks again. Nobody being able to agree to something like this, of course. And having held that border for a year now, it's little wonder that it has prompted Egypt to beef up its defences on its side of the border, to much Israeli grumbling and complaining that they might get hurt by them if they decide to try and invade Egypt. Oh dear, how sad. Never mind. But Hamas haven't just begun attacking Israel again. They've maintained it too. And it's worth catching up on what exactly has been happening in Gaza, which has led to this now apparent softening of Netanyahu's stance regarding hostage exchanges and a ceasefire, if we can believe such a thing is really happening. The biggest shock for Israel, perhaps, aside from Hamas still having rockets to fire when they thought those capabilities had been removed, is where Hamas are shooting from. Because pretty much all of the most recent Hamas attacks have been happening in northern Gaza, where they have been pushing to ethnically cleanse everybody from the entire north. Arguably, it can be assumed, therefore, that where Israel is at its most heavy-handed then, what they've actually done is create the best recruitment grounds for Hamas. People more in danger there, more desperate there, easier to recruit there maybe. But it has also underlined just how incompetent the IDF has been, that in an area they thought they were cleansing, that they thought they had so much control over the movements of people there, that not only were Hamas still present, but they were still heavily armed there as well. Now this has been borne out by 9 consecutive days of shelling by Hamas on the nearby Israeli settlements just north of the Gaza Strip, notably 3 shells aimed at the nearby city of Sderot, which previously came under regular Hamas shelling due to its close proximity to the Gaza Strip. Israel's air defences, poor as they are now widely regarded to be, was only able to take out one of these rockets, with the other 2 striking in and near the city. Now, wasn't it the Israelis who used to say that their Iron Dome defence system was designed specifically to deal with the amateurish rockets of Hamas? And yet here, they can only take out 1 out of 3? It's not looking good for them, is it? Israeli outlet Israel Hayom carried out interviews in Sderot, an excerpt of their work stating, "An Israeli mother of 5, Hadaya, initiated an emergency campaign through parent groups to suspend school activities indefinitely. This really is becoming intolerable," she told Israel Hayom, vowing to lead efforts to halt educational activities until security conditions improve. "We have returned to a state of war. This really is unbearable," another resident told the Hebrew outlet. According to most recent estimates, Hamas are now estimated to number around 23,000 individuals in the Gaza Strip. Arguably the greatest achievement Israel has managed, because this is what committing genocide from north to south in Gaza over 16 months has actually done. It has just been the biggest recruitment drive for Hamas going. Over the course of the last week, aside from firing rockets at Sderot, they've also targeted the city of Netivov with a Q-18 missile. Where was that hidden then? Military convoys in Gaza themselves have of course come under fire too, with Hamas capable still having the munitions to be able to take down even tanks, having targeted these in what was left of the Jabalia district, the largest refugee camp in Gaza as it once was, before people were turned out of it en masse. An area the IDF must have thought they completely controlled, before Hamas explosives were used to wreck their Merkavas. Hamas claimed to have destroyed 4 of them there. Now, to lose 1 to a group you supposedly had completely routed is careless, but to lose 4, though, well, that doesn't look good either. In another incident, an Israeli Apache helicopter was attacked at another refugee camp, the al-Bureijj camp. You do have to wonder about the IDF and their obsession with taking out refugee camps, don't you? Are those with nothing at all, children, women, the elderly, displaced and desperate, your actual go-to targets? Is that as big a target as you can aspire to take on? If so, it's no wonder Hamas are still going then, is it? But this also exposes yet another Israeli failure, because even as Hamas re-emerged and began rocket fire again, Israel were claiming that Hamas forces were split, and that their forces were now confined to just the north and the south of Gaza. But al-bureijj is in Deir al-Balah, central Gaza, actually not all that far from the Netzarim corridor Israel built across Gaza as a military structure and still man. And even here, Hamas appear to be right under their noses, active and armed. Israel naturally have responded to all of this, with more airstrikes, another 28 Palestinians killed, as they continue their attacks indiscriminately. But such is a problem with not reaching an agreement to stop, and a ceasefire that means something, isn't it? Yet now there may have been a shift, and it is allegedly Hamas that have put a new offer to Israel, and Netanyahu might have been blindsided by it and actually could be forced to accept it even. For the sake of getting a ceasefire over the line, Hamas have agreed to set aside at this point all issues of contention that remain unresolved in the talks. One of these is, of course, the ongoing issue of that Gaza-Egypt border. Hamas have said we'll come back to that at a later date, and Egypt, the ones being wronged by that Israeli occupation as well, have also agreed to let it lie for a time for the sake of getting a ceasefire in Gaza now. Another aspect put off for another day would be the full withdrawal of the IDF from Gaza. And as a result of making moves like this, it has put Israel and Hamas at the closest they have ever been to a ceasefire, as several outlets have been saying, though this is largely by default. By putting off all the bits Netanyahu has stated he couldn't agree to in effect, he's being backed into a corner to agree to the ceasefire that's left, to all the options that are left. He's had no argument with those. Now this could go one of 2 ways at this point then. The less likely option is that we get that ceasefire. And I base that purely on the number of times we've been here before. If Antony Blinken turns up in Israel now, for example, we know it's going to fail. The more likely scenario, though, is that Netanyahu will be yet again forced to find something else to find fault with, to blow these talks as well, because the likes of Smotrich and Ben Gvir have clearly stated they will pull the plug on his government if there is ever a ceasefire in Gaza. They want Gaza for their settler backers. Again, that'll just expose Netanyahu as the dishonest broker he is, though. Donald Trump has demanded a ceasefire before he becomes president again on the 20th, so it's going to look very bad for Netanyahu, even in his daft eyes, if he's the one that blows this now that all the bones of contention have been removed from the playing field, so to speak. Though he, has to be said, has very much been blaming Hamas all the way for there not being a ceasefire already. However, a hint of which way this may go yet has come from Israel's madman of a defense minister, Israel Katz. Complete destruction of Hamas is still the plan, according to him, despite the complete failure to do so already. Israel Hayom have reported that Katz has directed the Israeli army to submit a plan for the complete defeat of Hamas in Gaza, with an emphasis placed on the point that this plan will proceed if the captives are not released by the time Donald Trump assumes office. Now, this is not a point of negotiation, which is what you're actually supposedly involved in at this point. These are demands, these are threats that you can't actually back up. But Katz doesn't seem to care. And the question is, are his views in lockstep or out of lockstep with Netanyahu at this point? Because Katz has dismissed discussions of political solutions for Gaza, saying that no Arab or international actor would assume responsibility for Gaza's civilian management without the total collapse of Hamas. He is hell-bent on their destruction, despite 16 months of destroying everything except them in Gaza, and that includes their own hostages. In fact, everything has amounted to a recruitment drive for Hamas instead. Hamas have said that those hostages that were being held in the north of Gaza, they now can't account for. So the Israelis and their attacks and their indiscriminacy and their ethnic cleansing ended up wiping some of them out as well. Well, it wouldn't be the first time. It has not been in Hamas's interest to harm them. They were bargaining chips for them. They wanted prisoner exchanges, so that if anything has happened to them, it'll have to be on Israel. Which way do you reckon this latest set of negotiations over a ceasefire will go? Do let me know in the comments. Meanwhile, just to reinforce the depravity of Israel's conduct in the Gaza Strip, a new study of death toll estimates published in The Lancet has made for shocking and sickening reading. The underestimation in the official figures due to missing people and the ongoing destruction of hospitals in Gaza, making collating death toll data all the more difficult, and this damns the blue and white genocide apartheid state utterly. Get all the details of those shocking revelations in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe to help support the channel as well and ensure you don't miss out on new daily content, all very much appreciated as that is, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.